Welcome to the Adventures of Alice and Bob, the podcast where we get root access to the people shaping the world of cybersecurity today to find out a little bit about their journey, the events that have shaped their career, and those things that still keep them up at night. Today's guest has spent over 2 decades on the front lines of cybersecurity, from his early days as a software tester to becoming a CISO, navigating nation-state attacks and building security programs from the ground up. Tim Chase is currently the Principal Technical Evangelist at Orca Security, but his journey through cybersecurity kind of reads like a product roadmap around application security and how that's evolved from a niche specialty to a critical enterprise function. Tim has pioneered security programs at global organizations, navigated the complex world of international cybersecurity incidents, dealing with nation-state actors who manipulated open-source binaries in order to steal data when diplomatic channels had failed them. And as a recognized thought leader, Tim has authored LinkedIn learning courses on DevSecOps, spoken at major industry conferences like RSA and Black Hat, and served on the advisory board shaping industry certifications. He's really passionate about supply chain security, the evolution of phishing through AI, and helping organizations understand that security must work at the speed of DevOps and not be a barrier to that. So Tim, welcome to the podcast today.
Thanks, I appreciate it. That was a long intro. I can't believe 20 years is a long time.
I know, and you're interestingly, like, I think the key thing in there for me was how your career's kind of evolved in the way that the security landscape has. So let's jump back to the early days. Actually, we said you started as a software tester, but what got you interested in technology in the first place?
I've always been kind of a tech geek growing up. I've never been one of those people that would go and just code for fun or anything like that. But technology just kind of always came easy for me. And so when I went to college, I thought about being an engineer. But like in the 101 course, they had me design a trebuchet. There was kind of a competition, and I was like, I can't do this. Holy crap, this is not what I signed up for. I'd rather be in front of my computer. My mind doesn't work that way. So I kind of shifted over to computers. But I really kind of got a start in about 2002 in the job market, which for those of us that have been around that long, the job market was really tough in 2002. You had a lot of people that, were making really good money that couldn't find work. Job fairs were everywhere, with people flooding. And so I kind of took what I could, which was just a functional tester, right? It was for an insurance company called Willis. And that's what I did. I designed just manual tests all day and started to work in some automation using some of these kind of early automated tools for performance testing and regression testing and things like that. But, we kind of had our first CISO. It was kind of along those times that CISOs were not uncommon, but not common either. Obviously, today, everybody has a CISO, everybody has a director of security. They have somebody that oversees it. And at that time, that just wasn't a thing. And so, I was like, I don't really want to do functional testing for the rest of my career. And this security stuff looks really cool, right? I've always been one of those people that kind of takes, looks 2 steps ahead of where I want to be in my career and makes, just kind of decides what I need to do to get there and take those steps. And so I just met with the CISO of Willis at the time and said, hey, like I'm in there doing functional testing and automation and all this stuff anyway. Why don't you let me just do some manual testing, right? Like as long as you'll approve the security tools of the proxy where I can kind of do the manipulation, let me just do that. He was all on board, and that kind of, I would say, jump started my career into cyber there, because application, that was kind of before the time of like the automated SaaS tools and all of that. So.
And at the time when you joined that company, was security an element of the testing, or was that something it was completely new when you went to CISO and actually said, I can see a bridge between these two worlds?
Yeah, I mean, at that time, it was completely new, right? They were focused on moving from like a strict firewall to an IDS component, making sure that everybody had antivirus on their machines, right? I remember I installed some hacking tools on my set-top box because, I was doing this, and it probably was about an hour later that I got one of the CISO's engineers came over and was like, dude, what are you doing? And I was like, I have permission. I promise. Go talk to Mark. So this was kind of a new area for the company, right? And probably a little bit for the industry. I would say, obviously security testing was there, and the first CISOs, I think, technically go back into the 80s, and in all of that. But it was definitely groundbreaking, and it was new here. They had never done anything like it before.
And in terms of like the scene at that time, because again, we often think of these areas now, and that they're very well known and well established. And I can go on YouTube and find out how to use Burp Suite and all these different tools that are out there. How are you finding out the information about the tooling? How are you approaching like learning more about this? What were the resources out there to help you actually move forward?
Yeah, it was like the Hacking Exposed kind of books, right? It was the old school. I literally just went and bought books at Barnes and Noble back when I think that bookstores are back in style these days. Our local bookstores doing really well, but like back then, everybody went to the local Barnes and Noble, right? And so I just went in there, went to the computer section, and I was like, oh, these are a couple of good hacking books. And so literally, it was kind of that was my best resource. Obviously, OWASP has been around for a while. Everybody kind of when they're doing their scanning and doing their testing, they would always come back to prioritize what you're finding. But it really was just, I'm going to crack open a book, I'm going to try it on my computer at home, and then I'm going to come into work and try it there as well, right? Which it just helps when you have kind of that buy-in of the security leaders as well. Not everybody just wants you to start. Not everybody's going to approve the tools necessary to do it, but yeah, it literally was just kind of old school. I'm going to read a book and try it. Obviously, these days, there's a million different places you can go, kind of including certifications for ethical hackers, and you can take courses with SANS. There's a million different ways you can go about it, but that just wasn't as common back then. So it was just kind of the old bookstore chart for me.
And as you approach that, you were working, like you said, in an age when CISOs weren't rare, but they weren't exactly common. Was it always your ambition that's where you wanted to go? Or was it just you wanted to get more hands-on with security tooling and actually have, some people just say, I'm going to carve out a niche just focusing on application security as a career, but you've gone far broader than that. What was the motivation there?
Yeah, it was, I decided I didn't have this big idea that I wanted to be a CISO. Like, I don't think that was kind of even on my mind as a, young guy fresh out of college, but I did know that I wanted to do cybersecurity. That was, that kind of sparked a real interest in me. And I'm the kind of person that I don't like to stop learning, and I don't like to do the same things over and over. So I could tell that like in 2 and 3, 4 years, I was going to get kind of burnt out a little bit on doing the testing. And so I was like, well, cybersecurity is one of these fields that's always going to be moving and changing. Like, you could see that, right? And so I decided that anything that I did and any moves that I made, I would go ahead and make that move. And so, I finally got to the point where when I decided to make an employee change, they wanted me to come to their company to do some application performance testing. So they had a big project with Facebook that was going on, and they wanted me to come over and do a lot of performance testing of I think there are like 8 different parts to it. And I said, look, I'm not going to make that's a lateral for me, and I'm not going to do that, right? Um but if you'll let me do security testing as a part of that, and then eventually work that into my job function, I will come over. And they agreed, and I knew the guy. He was kind of a mentor of mine on the testing side. And so he said, yeah, let's do it. So that was kind of the big career pivot, right? Which is just one of the things that I truly believe. It's like, if you want to do something in your career, figure out how to get it done, figure out those people who can help you make it happen, and even do kind of work on the side to kind of get that experience and show that you're willing to do that extra. And that's what I did here. So I came in to Nielsen, and I did kind of the performance testing stuff, but then I ended up doing the application security testing as well as part of it.
And as that career went on, you eventually came into the CISO role. Again, was that just an opportunity that found you, or was that something you were looking to, again, take a broader view and just pivot a little bit more?
Yeah, it was. I just kind of wanted to do more in security. It was kind of like, so when I went over there and I did application security testing for a specific project, I eventually made the pitch to the CTO, like, let me do this full time. So before long, like, I was doing application security testing as a job, and then I started to get more people as a part of my team. And then it just kind of evolved into, you know what, like we need someone to oversee security for this entire org, right? At that time, it was kind of divided up into three different orgs. And so that's where I ended up leading security for, um, it's called Nielsen IQ now. At the time, it was Nielsen Buy, but when they were all one company. But it just kind of came into being because I wanted to own more security, right? You could see I'm always wanting to be more impactful. So like when I can see that something needs to be done, I want to do it. And I think kind of at the time when I was there, and this is nothing against anybody at all, but like the security kind of at that time was the Qualys scans and risk assessments. And that's kind of where it stopped. And I'm just like, I don't think that's enough, right? Which is why I added the cloud security. And then we ended up doing better vulnerability scans and kind of adding all this stuff. And that's why I ended up leading security for that whole unit. So it was just kind of one of those things that was like, it, I made the job pitch because I could see the job needed to be done and we made it happen.
Yeah, and what really interests me, because you've been right at the front edge of a lot of these things. So, when application security was just coming in as a thing, and then obviously as you've gone up through the different layers, and like we just talked about expanding out into cloud and actually making it part of the broader ecosystem, and then you made the real pivot, which has, I think it relates to your comment about wanting to have impact, where you actually were an early proponent of the kind of the field roles that are out there: field security, field CTO, field CISO. What how did you come about doing that? Because, in the days when you started doing that, it still isn't a hugely common role. Lots of larger or software vendors will have those kind of people out there, but it varies wildly depending on who you talk to, what their understanding of the role is. So what was it about the field aspect of those roles, and what did you think being a field CTO, field CISO was about for you?
Yeah, kind of had to feel it out a little bit because, like you said, it was kind of an undefined role to some extent, right? Um, the reason that I went that way was I'd done the CISO thing, a couple of times. I've led pretty large security teams, um, and I wanted to just try something different. I was kind of at the end of what I wanted to do and trying to decide where I wanted to go next. And um, I'd always I thought about being in sales because I do like talking. I've always been kind of speaking at conferences and doing trainings and all of that. But I just didn't. I couldn't see myself as like that salesperson that ends up taking everybody to dinner, doing all these late nights, or doing all the things that I think come with being a seller. I had a young family at the time, and I was like, that's just not kind of where I want to go, where I have to worry about that. And so I was like, well, then this field CISO role kind of came out with a startup, and I was like, well, the startup thing could be cool. I've never really looked into that before. And the field CISO role, the reason it kind of appealed to me was because it was salesy, but it wasn't uh, um, full-time sales, right? It was kind of this really interesting mix of being in cybersecurity and also helping sellers sell, right? And so I thought that would be pretty cool because it was still, I was like, I like to talk and speak and evangelize. That's part of the CISO thing. I've been a buyer for so long. I understand um, how CISOs and security leaders buy products. I can help, sellers understand that as well. And so I think I'll give that a try. And so I did. Did it for 2 years at a company called Calibra, and then 3 years at Lacework prior to ending up at Orca, where I am right now.
And how did you, you know, do you, how did you find those conversations coming from, depending on who's in that role? Sometimes people come at it from like a sales engineering role, solutions engineering role. Some people come at it from a technical side like yourself. How did you find your, previous experience gelled well in that role for, it's that kind of thing of having a sales conversation, but as a technical peer rather than necessarily someone who's trying to sell you a solution. You're trying to actually understand the technical details of a problem, right?
It's evolved over time. I'll be honest. Like I'll say that, at the beginning, it was really good because it was kind of a new role, and people didn't really quite know what a field CISO was, and I would get that. What is a field CISO exactly? Now it's a little bit more common. Um, so what I do find is that when I'm in person with somebody that I'm selling to, or if I am at an event with other CISOs, um, it to me it goes over very well because I've lived in the seat, right, and I've seen CISOs and security leaders, that they have been talking with the sellers, and then I come over and I introduce myself, and immediately just kind of shift the conversation, and you could tell that like, oh, you've been in the seat, you understand of when I go to the board, the kind of things that they want to see, or um, when we're trying to implement cloud security in a multi-cloud environment, like you've done that and you understand the complexities of doing that. So it to me, it goes over pretty well. Um, and the way that I also handle it is, uh, when I work with sellers, I kind of still let the sellers sell, right? The solutions engineers, the solutions architects, I still let those guys sell, and they do the proof of value. They do all of that, and that helps put them kind of in the box that the CISOs and the buyers, they understand, right? And then I'm kind of the guy who can help with the vision to show that, hey, like Orca's got this vision and we understand cloud security. Let me tell you about it, or let me tell you how I've done it before, and come at it from a thought leadership perspective. And I think that's a distinct difference, right? Because I'm not a seller, and they understand that, but I can kind of lend my experience to make sure that they're successful. So that's true. I usually let the seller sell and then let myself do the thought leadershipy stuff.
I'm a field CTO currently, and I'm using you as a cheat sheet as to what I should say when people ask me what I do. So this is perfect. I appreciate that, Tim.
Yeah, absolutely.
No, I think it's such a valuable role. I mean, like you say, it's that thought leadership and that strategic partnership with the customers, and then being able to take that back directly to the product and engineering sides of the organization, and really make sure that you're as tightly focused on the customer challenges as possible. So I think it's just a hugely valuable role. I'm really interested to hear how you were describing it there.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's the part that some people forget. Like I've talked with other recruiters, or I've talked with people who want to get into the role. What does it comprise? And the way that I typically will describe it, and you're one as well, so you can tell me if you see it differently. But it's like, there's like three pillars, right? There's the sales pillar, the product, and the marketing, for the most part, right? Those are typically where you sit. Some are adding a fourth, because have seen some companies that want to put this role in the CISO's organization and give them operational responsibility. So sometimes there's a fourth, but for the most part, there's three, right? And a certain percentage of your time goes into each. So like on the selling side, you'll help them understand how to sell to a CISO, and you'll help them maybe create a maturity model of like, how do you know as you build the product into your environment that you're there, like certain things that a CISO would do and help sell that's what you do. Then the marketing side, which is the webinars, the Evanta events, the conferences, all of that kind of stuff. That's kind of another peer, the blogs. So I do a decent amount of writing as well. And so you'll see that blogs that are out there that aren't too selly, but provide in thought leadership information that people can use. And then there's like just what you said, you take the information back to the product, because by talking to customers, talking to prospects, you should have an idea of what they want to see, and where you're missing. Solutions engineers will have it too. Like they've got a lot of valuable information to offer, but sometimes there's a little bit of a difference. Sometimes
Just
what
a
they
bit more
want,
strategic, isn't it?
a
Sometimes
bit more strategic. That's
Yeah.
exactly it, right? And so that's how you kind of fit into the three pillars. And then sometimes I used to run CTO and CISOs when I was at Lacework, and I would always say the CISOs tend to be a little bit more marketing-y, CISO-y, and then the CTOs tend to be more technical, right? So they're going to spend more of their time troubleshooting in the weeds with product and things. And then I tend to spend more of my time on the go-to-market and marketing side of things. So similar role in my view, just depending on the organization, they just weight differently in those three pillars.
Yeah, no, I think that's a really nice way to describe it. And yeah, I do agree with you actually there, that it's kind of the balance across those. And like you say, there's the kind of the CTO side, which tends to be the more technical engineering focused, versus the CISO side of things. So yeah, I think that's really interesting to look at it. And I just wanted, because it's one of those roles that I often get people wondering about and asking me about, and they're really interested in, but it's not often I get to have someone on the podcast with one of those titles and nerd out about it a little bit. So that was great. Um, while we're talking about kind of being on the front lines of things, let's jump back a little bit in your career, because supply chain attacks, again, all over the place now. People are talking about AI supply chain and all this kind of stuff. But you've had first-hand experience when you were working in an international company with, sophisticated nation-state attacks as that early example of some of the supply chain compromise attacks we see today. So maybe you could talk us through a little bit about what happened there, because I think it's a really interesting background to how that attack came about.
Yeah, it's interesting, and one of the things that I learned kind of working for a big multinational company is that not all countries are the same, right? Like, for the most part, you're in Europe and you're in the US, you're gonna not expect the nation state attackers. You're not gonna expect the US government to be hacking into your servers. That's typically what you're gonna see. But as you go to some of these other countries where you want to do business, there's a reason sometimes you have burner phones when you go to these countries, right? And we always make our execs have them. And I just remember a case where um, uh, we used to do a lot of measurement and things like that. And at this particular company, and we had a piece of software that was open source that we had modified for our own use, right? And we started noticing some abnormalities on the way that the software was acting, the way that it was collecting data. Um, and it took us a while. Like, it's acting like we're not getting any errors per se, but the data is weird. Um, and it's a little bit hard to track because, there's this particular piece of software was installed on like hundreds of servers, because it was used worldwide in different data centers across the world. Um, and so, I was kind of involved in it from an application security perspective, really looking into it, and nobody could figure it out. They're like, we can't figure out why it's being abnormal. It's being really weird. It's not malicious per se that the malware, that your antivirus is picking it up, but something isn't right. And I had a really smart um, engineer. Like, I'm a big fan. I was kind of an early proponent of uh, kind of the security guy who can do it all. I think they call them security engineers. Sometimes these days I call them security architects, but it's one of those Swiss Army knives in the security world. And so this guy, he wrote a script. And so while everybody was over here trying to figure it out, he wrote this script that went across all of the servers. And what he found was that not all of them, but a subset of the binaries had been modified. And so somehow, in a way, they were able to kind of compromise the supply chain of this, of where we use this open source, and they were able to modify it just enough to be able to send the data to themselves. Because what had happened was that particular country had wanted some of the data. Right? They were very much a country that would like the data of its own citizens to understand what they were doing, and we obviously said no. We value the privacy of our customers. They didn't take no for an answer. They found a way to manipulate the binaries to get the data that they wanted anyway on the back end. And then finally, the way they were able to find it out was by just looking at like I said, they didn't do it broadly. They just managed to modify a handful of them. That was enough to where they could get the data that they needed. And so that was kind of an early example of a supply chain attack. Like, I think that was before, it would have been before SolarWinds even at the time. So it was really interesting to see that was kind of before they were well known, that people were still thinking about it.
Again, it's always why it's a good example to highlight, because it's one of those early examples. We've seen SolarWinds, we've seen lots of examples of supply chain attacks since then. Why do you think as an industry we're still struggling with this? We're rushing around and now seeing AI supply chain attacks and all kinds of different things happening in that. Why are these lessons just repeating throughout history, do you think?
I think sometimes I think sometimes we're reactionary and we don't look at the root of the problem. That's one. Because I'll just give you an example. Like let's just take SolarWinds. Like I'm not, I don't cast any stones. Like because I think that everybody can look back at an incident and be like, oh, I would have done this differently. So, I don't cast any stones on the CISO or anybody there. But I think people, what they looked at, they looked at, oh, holy crap, this binary got modified and sent out to a lot of people. We need to be understanding who's doing business, who we're doing business with, what agents we have installed. Like that's where people were focused, right? But I think when I looked at it, I just had a little bit of a different view on it. And I said, well, like to me, you got to back up and say, well, how did they get that access? How did you not know that those binaries were modified? Right? Oh, they got source code access that you never noticed, right? So you thought it was a legitimate user that checked the code in. There wasn't a peer review that caught it. And that's what got pushed out. Like that's where we should be focused. Like the other stuff is important. But this over here is still important. So I think that's one reason why is we don't know that we always do a great job of getting to the root cause of it. And I think another reason is I think sometimes we're just overburdened. Like like if you look at cloud security, I've been doing cloud security now for a while, right? And I was buying cloud security tools in the mid 2000s, and I had thought that CSPM was a done deal, right? Like that we were done with that, and that we had moved on to runtime. But it turns out it's only very recently, 10 years later, that we have finally, I think, starting to shift over to realizing that runtime is important, right? So, which was just really interesting to me because I was like, well, crap, I had this stuff covered 10 years ago before Paulo really got into the game, right? So I think sometimes we as a security team, we don't always move fast enough. And so we do play catch up. And I think that's why we're still getting hit with some of these. It's just now, it is funny that just now we're starting to realize that supply chain matters, because for so long, you've probably been in the industry for a while too. When you heard supply chain, you probably thought of that Target attack where an AC vendor was compromised, right? That's what we thought of.
Mechanical services, yes. I remember them
Correct.
well.
The mechanic. Yes. That's what you think of when you think of supply chain, but that's not what supply chain necessarily means anymore. That's still important. Don't get me wrong, but supply chain means everything. So we've slowly started to see supply chain turn over to being open source, right? Which is why there's some SBOM started to be popular, and license, tracking the licenses started to be important, and now we're starting to see this be even more important. We're finally, I feel like, starting to shift to where we're seeing source code repos and open source having an even more of a light shine on them, because that's how we're kind of defining supply chain now. So now supply chain security is a big thing that maybe is too broad. I don't know.
Yeah, and there's challenges within that, right? If we look at, Heartbleed, where everyone just assumed because everyone could see it, it was there, and, someone would pick it up and it wasn't their responsibility. It's kind of that, when it looks like someone else's problem, it's going to be invisible to most organizations, right?
Yes, exactly. Yeah, 100%.
Yeah, so there's, like you said, there's a number of challenges there, and I think a lot of it just comes down to people struggle with doing the boring things, the kind of the hygiene, the wash your hands, the process of going through these things. Everyone wants to just buy the box with the flashing lights that detects the problems for you, and then you can say, I bought that thing, why didn't it pick it up, and go yell at that vendor instead. So it's an interesting mindset sometimes, and I think we see these things coming through time and time again. As we're talking about the events that have shaped your career, there's nothing more shaping of a career than when you start as an organization as a CISO, and within your first month discover they've been breached. So how did it feel landing in that hot seat, and how did that come about?
I was just kind of like, all right, here we go. Right. Like, I hadn't been there very long. And then all of a sudden we saw that, some data had gotten stolen. We gotten information around it. And to me, it was, it was an opportunity to prove myself. Obviously, when you're there, they haven't had a lot of security incidents like this before. It was a good opportunity to prove ourselves, right? And so that's when um, it became, obvious that they didn't have an incident response plan that was in place. So people really didn't know what to do. So it was kind of like, all right, war room, everybody go to this conference room. Let's power through this. It took them a little bit of time to know exactly what servers were impacted. We had to kind of rebuild them because we weren't 100% positive whether they were still dormant or not. So we ended up having to just kind of rebuild from scratch and test that out. So, but on the plus side, it gave you a little bit of wiggle room, I guess, to come up kind of and start fresh after the incident. After you recover, we're like, okay, let's do this better next time. Lesson learned. We're going to have a group of technical folks that will do the work. And here are the people who need to be informed. Here are the execs that need to be informed, and how often to be informed. And like, it gave us a really kind of an opportunity to shore up a lot of the things that we should have been doing before that. But, it was good because you got, I mean, you've been on the job for a month or whatever, and then you're in the middle of this incident, and you got the CEO and chairman that's there asking for updates. You got the president who's there asking for updates, and just showing that you and your team can get through it. I think just kind of is a good exercise, and then you can gain some trust from it.
And like, speaking of trust, it's an interesting position to be in because you've only known the team a month. You probably don't know what they're fully capable of, where their strengths and weaknesses lie. This instance happened. Like, how did you navigate knowing how much to trust people? How hands-on did you have to be? How did you balance all those different things? Because I guess the natural tendency is just to try and take over and kind of micromanage everything.
One of the things as a manager that I think I'm pretty good at is reading people and understanding people, right? Because I'm a big believer in making sure that the right people are in the right roles and so that they can succeed. So I did have a decent understanding of the team that we had at the time. Maybe not as much some of the other folks in the organization that were going to be doing the work. So I will tell you that I didn't have. It was more of a trust but verify. So I was not ready to just like let them lead it. I definitely was not ready to let my team have those executive level communications. So I was definitely very involved, making sure that everybody knew what they were supposed to be doing, who was doing what, when was it going to be done. I was not ready to delegate that. I would give people assignments on the team that I thought they could do it, but I would definitely continue to follow up. Because in this particular case, I was lucky enough that I knew the previous CISO, and we had a conversation and was able to do a pretty good handoff. He was actually there for 2 to 3 weeks while I was there, to be able to kind of do that handoff. So, yeah, definitely, I'm still that way to some extent, right? Like, I've got a team that I trust, but like, I still want to be involved. I'm not a update me once a day kind of guy. I'm just not. So.
Yeah. And I don't know how much of the technical details you can share there, but is there anything that was like the priority to implement post that incident? What was the missing control? Was there a thing you could have done to have prevented that in the first place?
Yeah, it was kind of just knowing what was available to the outside world, right? It was an older application that had a security bug on it, right? And so that was able to be exploited. Um, uh, in it, part of that was just because we didn't have a good understanding of what we were securing. Like, security 101, know your landscape, know what you have, can't secure what you don't know, right? And we didn't know about this application. It was just one of those that was kind of hanging around. And then once they got onto it, they were able to kind of manipulate and kind of pivot around to some other servers that were on the same network. So it was just an older application that hadn't been updated. And that's, at the time that, and it still is, it's a common attack vector, right? Where whether even if it's in the cloud now, you find an application that's exploited or a hole in the um, in the network or whatever in the cloud, and you get in there and you exploit it. And that's kind of exactly what this was. So that kind of The other thing that did was obviously give us a little bit of ammunition to make sure that everything like, hey, we need to be updating this kind of stuff, right? Let's make sure that we're doing that, and kind of kicked us off down a ServiceNow project that took a little bit of time as well to help on the inventory front.
And then shifting gears from those kind of legacy vulnerable web applications that are out there to the modern thing, I've heard you talk about AI as being the new way to bypass authentication, rather than focusing on AI security tools. Could you talk to us a little bit more about what you mean in there as the new way to bypass authentication?
Yeah, I mean, I think when you look at a lot of the attacks today, I think a lot of them are identity focused. I think obviously there's always going to be um, the script kiddies or whatever you want to call them that are scanning for open ports like that. That's just going to be there. That you'd be dumb not to at least try that way, right? But like the more sophisticated ones, in some of the breaches that we see today are related to identity. And I think we're starting to see them shift. Even going back to the casino that was hit probably a couple years ago now, that was an identity focused one. And they just used the call center and some, ability to talk their way through it. But these days it's becoming easier, right? With AI, you're able to, um, even just like your phishing is better. Right? How long ago was it that your phishing was full of misspellings and you could tell it wasn't formatted like the person it was coming from. But now we're living in a world of where you can craft your prompt to just say things, hey, I would like to create a phishing email from James. Look at his writings in his podcast to understand how he talks. Use British manners of speaking, um, and then craft an email uh, to try and reset a password, or something along those lines, right? And so it's smart enough to be able to write um, like other people. Like that was kind of the funny thing at first. Like when we first had our AI assistant at a previous company, we'd be like, "Hey, write this email like a cowboy. Write this email like a CEO." But used maliciously, it can take that. So now they're getting better crafted, right? And you could even use that to videos these days as well, right? So deep fakes are a thing. So even if you got to do like video authentication and things like that, you've got to really be careful, right? I mean, I don't know about you, but like for the last job that I took, I had to get on the phone, get on the video call with HR, hold up my passport so they could verify that I was who I said I was and that I wasn't just a deep fake. So that's really kind of changing the game as it relates to identity there, right? Continually finding ways to steal those credentials that allow you to bypass into the cloud, bypass into the source code to manipulate, at that level. So that's kind of my take on it.
Yeah. And on the flip side of that, how do you think about the risk of, usually for every AI agent or every task you set it off on, there is some sort of non-human identity behind the scenes, often with highly privileged access to systems and data to be able to do those things. And in kind of this, like we saw before, the race to the cloud, right? The race into SaaS applications. Now we're seeing the race into AI. And some organizations, they don't actually have a choice in this. The users are just doing it and connecting shadow AI systems up. So how do you think about kind of, from your perspective, those risks around the non-human identities that are being created around this and the privileged and the access they have?
Non-human identities were a problem before AI started to take off, right? NHIs have been this thing. There's been entire companies that have been founded to solve this problem. What did I see the statistic? It was like 10 to 1, a year
Yeah,
or so
it's up to
ago.
like 100 to 1, depending on whose
It's 100 to
statistics
1
you're looking.
now.
Yeah.
Like it's insane, right? And the cloud only makes this worse because of the way that um, that the cloud works. And I think it's a good thing. Like gone are the days where you have an Active Directory user group sort of structure. So the AI tip to me, this just puts more pressure on us to get identity security right, right? So because I think for so long, um, a lot of the typical ways to think about identity security like some of the legacy vendors that are still out there today, they still think very much in users and groups, right? But and even if you add users, groups, and roles, that's important. But I think you have to have a really good understanding of, in an automated way, to understand what these users are actually doing, what the agents are actually doing, the roles that are getting assigned to these agents. That's where Kim, I think, comes in to some extent, where you can kind of look at the acts that they're doing, compare to them to the permissions that they do have, and be able to take away that access. But I think ultimately, um, potentially, like the ultimate solution is going to be more like some JIT combined with these permissions for these AI agents, because I don't think you're going to want AI agents to persist with permissions to make source code changes or make cloud configuration changes, or whatever permission you're allowing them to do. I don't think you're going to want them to persist like that. Like, so my gut is long term, like there's going to be some automated JIT provisioning that will go along with these AI agents, and I'll be curious to see how it evolves over time, because I know there's a lot of folks wanting these AI agents to do this automated remediation. But man, we don't even do auto remediation well today without agents, right? Like, if you think about it, like um, if you look at some of the tools out there that have auto remediation, like at one point, 95% of people didn't do it. They didn't trust the security tools to auto remediate. They always wanted to look at it. I think that will change because of just the scale. Like if it's 100 to 1, that's not scalable for a human to look at. But I do think that I think it'll be Kim along with some JIT, that just in time related functionality that will allow us to scale like that. Hopefully that answers the question.
Yeah, no, it does. I think I completely agree with you there, that this mentality that we used to be able to mentally model, like, here's your domain admins, here's your standard users. It was something we could think about. Now we have, dozens of cloud applications, thousands of entitlements out there. Scale that by a factor of 10 to 100 for non-human identities. It's not manageable. You can't put the policies in place. You need actually more dynamic workflows, more just in time, reducing standing privileges, all these things. I was actually, I should be able to talk about this because it'll be, by the time this comes out, it'll be out of embargo. But there was an attack against a very popular AI tool that people are using internally. And the attacker basically sends you a malicious document that contains some instructions for that, and also some things around like sales figures. And what happens is, when that lands in someone's inbox, if someone in the organization then searches for Q3 sales figures using this AI tool, it scrapes everyone's files and documents, reads in these malicious commands, and then processes them and exfils any data that the attackers have asked for to that. But because of the level of privilege and access it has access to all the company data in these instances they've discovered. So it's been set up in a highly privileged role that exists 24/7. So all it is this combination of an email that someone doesn't even need to open, and a query that someone's probably going to make in the organization, and data is being sent out in, basically they were exfilling it in images out the back door. So I think there's really interesting attack vectors, whether it's a kind of command injection stuff that they're doing or whatever it is, that we're simply not equipped to deal with our kind of detection-based looking for malware tools that we have today.
Yeah, I think the way that I talk about it, like when I talk with customers, here at Orca, like, it's one of those things that there's no one solution for AI security, right? There's an entire life cycle that you have to secure, the way that I look at it. And it's like, you start with these AI SBOMs, and which AI models am I using, and are they secure or not, just like you would with anything else. Then you can look in the code to know where you're calling an MCP server, like where am I initiating that inside of my code. And then it's like, okay, let's move to more to production. It's okay, what AI models am I using in my environment, right? Cataloging those. And not only that, but what data do those services have access to, right? Because that's important too. Just, you can use Bedrock, and that's cool. But like, if Bedrock has access to your sales data, you probably want to know that, right? And so, and then there's also kind of the AI agent and the roles part, and what access to those, what data do those agents have access to? So there's an entire kind of plan that you need to have in place when it comes to your AI security. You just got to be able to kind of take a step back and look at it. There's no just cataloging all of what your all of the models you're using alone is not going to work, right? You've got to have all these other pieces to have kind of a full AI security picture.
Yeah, and I think those are some of the challenges between people like the Cloud Security Alliance try and solve with, I think it's Maestro, their framework, because the traditional kind of threat modeling things like Stride, they work very well for traditional software, but AI has such a greater attack surface and so many component parts to it, whether it's, the supply chain of the models themselves, the infrastructure it sits on, like you say, all the different things that are part of that stack that form the AI, that requires a different way of thinking. So Maestro, if anyone's not familiar with it, is worth a look at because it talks in a very similar levels that you were talking about there to how you can start to approach these risks. Before we run out of time here, you've been in the industry 20 years, you've worn many hats, you're clearly passionate about the evolution of the industry and solving the problems that are out there. What are the things you think as an industry that we're not talking about enough and not spending enough time focusing on?
Good question. Two things that I would say. I know we talked about it a little bit, so I don't want to rehash it, but I do think just having an understanding of the supply chain security is important. We're so focused on AI security right now. We can't forget that left side, if you will, of security, right? It's so important, whether it's securing the source code that you have, getting an understanding of the open source you use in your organization. You've seen a lot, like you can look at kind of our threat research team and some of the stuff that they've done, but like it's a huge threat vector right now of people manipulating open source. And, if you're using open source, it's not maintained well and somebody else comes in and makes a change that you take, like, just pay attention to that part. I would say like AI is important and focus on that, but don't forget about this other. The other thing that I would say is like, don't forget about the people aspect of this. And what I mean by that is, we need to continue to do education of people that aren't in cybersecurity, like of our workforce, but we can't do it in the same way that we've always done it, right? The cybersecurity awareness and the phishing training that we've been doing for 20 years won't work today, right? And I think the future is going to be like, do your education training in a way that is focused on them, right? Like, and what I mean is, like, if you're a developer, you probably don't need to know about wire transfer fraud and how cybersecurity people are finding ways to manipulate that. Like, they're not going to give a crap, but they do care about supply chain and what they need to do there to secure their identity for people that may want to steal it. And the flip that around. Like, if you're in finance, you need to know about the wire transfers. You probably don't care about like identity security of source code. So I say that to say is, like, when you're thinking about it and how to push security out to your organization, make sure you're educating them on the things that matter to them to do their job, and also things that are up to date. Like don't just click the button on the awareness training for every year where you're learning not to use the hotel Wi-Fi or something, which we've been doing for 20 years, right? Like, so that's the other thing I say. Don't forget the people and train them for these modern threats.
Yeah, absolutely. I think there's a really interesting thing, I think, with that security training where it misses the point of developing the cybersecurity mindset. And it focuses them on very literal things. And what I see attackers do very successfully is go, oh, you need to do this for security reasons now, right? These things that pop up on the screen and say, okay, we think you're a robot, so just run this command in the command line to prove you're not a robot. And you're copying and pasting, PowerShell scripts into the command line and running them because the website tells you it's for security reasons. And I think we actually wire people wrong, and they get very used to looking for set signals rather than actually thinking through what the implications are. So I think that's a great point around the education piece, and, like you say, tailoring it, the right message to the right people so they're not zoned out to it there. If we gave you the patent pending Alice and Bob magic wand to change one thing about the industry, what would you change?
It would probably be just one thing. Dadgummit.
We'll give you two. We like you, Tim.
Two. Okay. One is stop using acronyms. Like, I'm still burnt out from CASB, DLP.
I threw Maestro in there a second ago, and I was guilty as anyone else there. Yeah.
That's okay. Like, that's a framework. I'm okay with frameworks, right? Like OWASP, CIS, NIST, all that. That's cool. But like, I still hear them thrown about today. I was in a presentation or something where they were talking about DLP, and I'm like, what is DLP, folks? Like, come on, like, stop using, like, just do the thing. Don't try and oversell yourself, and just see what you're going to do. And I think the other thing, maybe this is silly, but don't be negative Nellies. I would say, like, I've tried to change my messaging of security is hard to look at all the things that we can do in security, right? It is an awesome challenge that we get to solve, right? And we have a lot of tools in our tool belt to do it. The AI is going to be a great one. And I do think that AI is going to be more advantageous for us than for the attackers. Just that's Tim Chase's view. So like, when you're thinking about security and you're talking about security, whether it's internally to your teams, whether it's external, like, talk about the fact that have a positive mindset of like, these are some of the things that we're experiencing right now as an industry, and look at all the ways that we can fix it together, right? Like, don't be like, oh, we're drowning in alerts and we're never going to get out, and like, just like, there's a lot of tools that we have now, and just have a positive spin kind of on where we're at, because we're definitely, I think, in a better place than we were when I started many years ago.
Yeah, I absolutely love those two things, actually. And yeah, that kind of mentality of, being busy doesn't mean you're actually securing things any better than, actually doing it in a calm and less dramatic way. So yeah, no, absolutely. That's great. And if people want to learn more about your work, the training courses you do, what's going on at Orca Security, what's next for you, where's the best place to find those things out?
Find me on LinkedIn. I've got all of the courses there. If you want to know more about Orca Security, orca.security, or hit me up on LinkedIn. Both of those places are valid. Just connect to me. Would love to just talk. I love talking with other people in the industry. So just feel free to connect and let's have a conversation.
Well, that's wonderful. Thank you very much, Tim. Unfortunately, that's all we have time for on today's Adventures of Alice and Bob. A big thanks to our guest, Tim Chase, for remaining positive throughout this, not being a negative Nelly, and driving forward security at every different level that he's been involved in. As always, thanks to super producer Jesse and the team at Beyond Trust who make this podcast happen. I'm James Maud, and this has been Adventures of Alice and Bob.
Thank you for listening to the Adventures of Alice and Bob. Do you have any stories from the cybersecurity trenches that would make our listeners' jaws drop? If so, we would love to have you on the podcast. Maybe you faced down a ransomware attack with nothing but coffee and determination, discovered a breach in the most unexpected way, or had a pen test go horribly wrong. Whatever your tale, funny, harrowing, or just plain wild, we want to feature you on the show. To share your cybersecurity war stories, email us at booking@merchantsmedia.com.